Sorry, I got a new software update on my computer, so it's they move things around and you have to trial and error. But we're going to continue with the Book of Hebrews. So if you're new online, we've been for 5 months going through the apostles. I can't believe I thought it'd be like 12 weeks, but we ended up going a little longer. But we just finished the apostles, and then we're going to go through the book of Hebrews, but we're not going to do it the same timing that we usually do it. Like meaning like 4 verses will be an hour. You know what I mean? Like that was our first talk on Hebrews, was 4 verses, but we're going to try to get through maybe like 2 chapters a time. So essentially, like after today, we'll be like almost halfway done the book of Hebrews, right? So, and it's really argument based, the book of Hebrews. So remember, we don't know who the author is. Okay, we don't know who the author is. Some people think it's Paul. Some people, again, as you as you know someone, you know the way they write, right? I've had friends you kind of know the way they communicate, and all of a sudden magically it's like they have polished English and like, whoa, where'd they learn how to type like this? Chat GPT. Right? But the fact is, like, right? If you didn't know this, for instance, First Peter, Second Peter, in the Greek, the Greek is very polished. Okay, Second Peter, it's not that polished, and the point is that Peter wrote it, but he's a fisherman, got bad grammar, spells you just with the but it's very clear is that Second Peter was written by him and First Peter was not. It was written by a scribe. You know what I mean? So again, the point is, like, you kind of know. So some people would suggest that Hebrews was written by Paul because 70% of the style is similar to Paul, but the 30%, and what's big in the 30% is the introduction, right? We all know Paul by the way he starts off, and Hebrews, the very beginning of it, is clearly not the Apostle Paul. Okay, so again, it's if you believe it's Paul, this is all speculation. You're saying I believe it because there's similarity. Ironically, went through the apostles. Other people believe that it's Apollos, right? And remember, Apollos was from Alexandria, which is one of the Pentarchies, was from there, and you have Philo of Alexandria, this is before the time of Christ. During the time of Christ, he was a Jewish philosopher that was heavily influenced with Greek philosophy, and he was the one that amalgamated Greek philosophy. And this is the time of Christ that he existed, Philo of Alexandria, but he never mentioned Jesus, which is something that's very interesting. But he was alive during the time of Christ, and would take the Old Testament and use philosophy with it. So that area, Alexandria, which is named after Alexander the Great in Egypt, most likely Apollos had that influence, right? Which is why they were when he went to Corinth and when he went to Ephesus, they were mesmerized by his oratory skills, right? That's why in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, "I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Cephas." The point was this guy had so much influence because of his oratory skills, right? So if you ever wonder, John 1:1, we talked about this, like the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Why Word? Right? The concept of the Word was a first century way of saying how to connect the physical and the non-physical together, the spiritual and when the real world connect, the logic. That the whole concept of the logic, the logos, came from Philo of Alexandria. So when John 1:1 is saying in the beginning was the Word, he's essentially taking Genesis 1:1 and taking the popularity of Philo of Alexandria and putting them together. So for us in a contemporary audience, we're like, why does he open up like this? Well, in the first century, they were able to connect the dots. Philo of Alexandria is taking Old Testament theology, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and Greek philosophy, right? And putting them together, showing that there is something called a logic, and that logic became a human being. You see, so again, I'm putting them together. But essentially, some people believe it's Philo of Alexandria. Is it bright where you guys are? Because you guys online or no?
No, it's perfect.
Okay. Because the sun's on my face, and it's so dark I can't even see anyone online. Yeah, good, the dim. So, some people believe Hebrews was written by Barnabas. But again, those are the three people that people think wrote the book of Hebrews. Most likely, it was written before the year 70 AD, and the reason why we know it's written before the year 70 AD is because when it talks about the sacrifices, we'll go into this next week. You guys okay? Like the heat? Is it okay? Yeah. Is that the reason why it was written before 70 AD because it speaks about animal sacrifices, but in the present tense, right? If it was after 70 AD, past tense, but it's ongoing, and that's next week. That's next week's argument. So we're trying to take this into arguments. First argument: Jesus is better than who? Than
Moses.
Angels. Than angels. Jesus better than who? Moses.
Sorry.
Right? Jesus better than who today? The high priest. Right? Jesus better than who? Sacrifice. That's, you see, and it's present tense. The book of Hebrews was written to who?
The Hebrews.
The
And then if we were to have a church coffee shop store, it'd be called Hebrews, right? He space brews, right? So, but again, it's written to Jewish Christians, and we went over the semantics of what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be an Israelite, what it means to be a Hebrew, right? Technically, this essentially was a Jewish crowd, right? But again, you can use the name Hebrews in reference to them. And the reason why I say this is a Jewish crowd is because first century. By the time it's the first century, you only have the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Levi, and the tribe of Benjamin. Paul was a Benjamite. I think Barnabas was from Levite, right? And then you have people from. So essentially, if someone was a Jew, you're associated with Judah. So you use the term in a rigid sense. Someone from the tribe of Dan, someone from the tribe of Reuben, they wouldn't be a Jew; they'd be a Hebrew. You see, but again, by the time it's the first century, it all got lumped together. That's why Paul, technically speaking, he's not a Jew. Paul was a Benjamite, but the reason why I'm saying he called himself a Jew is because they all got lumped together as far as the south, right? 586 Babylon. So you have the Jews, from Judah. Right, you have the Benjamites, and then you have the Levites all together, and they were kind of all lumped as the Jews, right? So, it's written to Jews. Kevin?
So then, in those three categories, was there Ephraim, or they were like ended by the conquest?
Yeah, they became the Samaritans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's like you hear the question. I don't know. I think it was Tucker Carlson that talked about it. I don't know. But again, some people ask about what does it mean to be Jewish nowadays, right? Because again, first century, they did not know where the 10 tribes were at the time because they were so amalgamated as far as Samaritans, right? Mm-hmm. So no, we thought of this. Remember the 12 apostles or disciples. And the 12 tribes, and some people wanted to link, right, one disciple with one tribe. That would have been more easier to follow, right? But that's not true. Most, I think 11 out of the apostles were from Judah, right? But Judas, right? So no, some people like to do that as far as one apostle or disciple was from Dan. It would have been easier to follow because that's why he picks 12. Right? There's more than 12 apostles. There's more than 12 disciples. It's just Jesus took 12 as far as the new kingdom in reference to the 12 tribes, right? So technically there were 13 tribes, right? But again, there's numbers that needed to be preserved, right? So, anyways, so again, we don't know who the author is. Written before 70 AD to the Hebrews, to Jewish Christians, and the essence of it, okay, and you're going to see it here in our passage, is that there was a falling away that happened. So every time the author puts up an argument, Jesus is better than, he'll list it, and then there's always a warning. Okay, there's always a warning. So the first was Jesus. The whole premise of the book is that Jesus is more superior. Jesus is better, and it's in contrast to ideas, people that were so influential in the first century that there was a combat with as far as an allegiance towards Christ. Every generation has that issue, right? Our generation has that. First century Jewish Christians had that. It's at the end of the day, the human heart will experience new things. Your eyes will see a different person, a new ideology, and be like, oh my, and your heart will be captivated. And there's that temptation with all of us is to put whatever that is above an allegiance towards Christ, right? In the first century, it was angels, right? Not just to anyone, but to Jews in particular. And the reason why it was the Jews in particular, as far as there was an elevation towards angels in first century Jewish culture, is because angels were the one that brought the Torah, right? And people nowadays we don't really associate that, but when we think of angels, you just think of like wings, and no, an angel was the one that got the Torah and gave it to Moses, right? We obviously when we think of getting the Ten Commandments, it's like we'll filter it through one of these films like Ben-Hur, right? Or what was the whole film with like you just have the 10 tablets, and then his face will be all orange and glowy, right? Right. But realistically, it was angels that delivered the Torah to Moses. There's 3 passages that we went through that suggests one in Galatians, one in Acts, and then one in Deuteronomy, right? So and then you reread the book. If you read the book of Daniel, like angels have such a almost near godlike status, right? And to a Jew, Archangel Michael is the fighter for. So we talked about territorial spirits, right? And if you're a Jew, your angel is Michael, because it says it in Daniel chapter 10, right? So if that's true, and part of me believes that there are territorial spirits, that if that's the case, then currently right now, the Archangel Michael is fighting Israel in Israel right now. I can't prove that, but I'm taking Daniel chapter 10, and Archangel Michael saying like there's the Prince of Israel, Prince of Persia, right? And again, these are clearly not humans, right? So, anyways, but Christ is better than angels, and there are beliefs out there that believe that Jesus is an angel. Did someone knock on the door? No. Or glorified angels. One of them, Jehovah's Witnesses. Right? Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe in the New World Translation, so they don't have the same Bible as we do. But in one of their a big premise from them is John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was a God. Mm-hmm. New World Translation.
I hate that.
A small g God. And it's all about the definite article, the, right? So essentially, but a God, and what do you mean by a God, is that they believe that Jesus is the first created being, but he is Archangel Michael. You see that? So again, we see it in our day today. It happened in the first century where they wanted to, I guess, put Jesus a little lower than God, but a little above the angels, right? But the essence of Hebrews chapter 1 in the first argument was, no, it's not true, right? And clear. Hebrews chapter 1 is one of the passages that really emphasizes the divinity of Jesus Christ. So he's better than angels. How about that? Right? And then we like to say, well, angels gave the Torah to Moses and they're punished for it. And then Hebrews 1 says, well, Jesus gave the gospel. How about that to you guys? Imagine the punishment for that. It's eternal. right? And then the second argument he makes is that Jesus is better than who?
Moses.
Moshe, right? And that he clearly, like, if you want to talk about Jewish Christians, they heavily elevate Moses, right? We talked about this last week, but what we say, Moses, who else? Abraham and King David, probably the three most influential Old Testament figures, right? So, again, a lot of emphasis on that, but the whole point of it is that Jesus himself is better than Moses. Okay? Any questions?
Well, just going along with what you're saying, and the elucidation of like the text is basically, from my perspective, it's like Hebrews 1, and a little bit after that, it's just basically summarizing it, Jesus, and like the organizational chart of like God and his kingdom and how he's set it up in hierarchy. And people are bad at a lot of things, but it's like they're bad at understanding that hierarchy and that organizational chart that God keeps on re-emphasizing throughout his text. But it's just kind of like, if you understand it like that, then you can kind of like see in your head, like, this is how he set it up. And then you don't get misled by other people who are just saying like, oh, Jesus is this or that, or, it's like, if you understand how God set it up in the organization, it's like, it's clear. But it's like so many people, like, it's like they don't understand angels. They don't understand all these different things. So it's like when they talk, it's like it's like a slop fest with like information. No one's really like bringing up the word. It's just opinion. So it's like, it's nice to see, God is ultimately of order and hierarchy, and, he's of, order and all those words that align with order and purpose and all that. So
I thought you said God is a hoarder.
Oh, no, I didn't say order. O-R-D-E-R. Yeah. No, that's funny. It's probably, just me slurring my words because I'm trying to be a little quiet, but I don't want to be too loud. But that's funny.
It's interesting applying, words like, hoarding or like narcissist or, to God. I heard a sermon by John Piper. And it kind of reminded me of what you said, Bonnie, and like kind of what you said, like putting it together. But like I remember, he's Passion. Passion's a conference for like college students in Georgia by Louis Giglio. The famous sermon, Laminins, the cross. But I remember John Piper was speaking at one of these like Passion conferences, and he was like, "God, the way he talks. God is an egomaniac. He's a narcissist. You have an issue with that, like this." But to someone that you're listening, oh my, this is hard to believe. Oh, how could he be all or like a hoarder, But if you think of it, it's like we're applying these words from a human perspective to God, and that doesn't really correlate. And the reason why is because that goes against our nature. Being a narcissist, being a hoarder, goes against our nature. It doesn't fit. It doesn't sit well. But when it comes to God, there's a consistency to it. You see that? So when it comes to God being like, God is an egomaniac. Yeah, but it's consistent with his nature. He's supposed to. That's just it's who he is. To us, it's uneasy because of our nature. You see what I'm saying? So it's like a lion eats meat. To a vegan, like, well, that's what a lion does. There's a nature to it. So when it comes to God, and like there's a certain status there's an order. It has to work that way. I'm sorry, and we're beings that are in that reality, and we have to make sense of this life, right? But there is that worship component to it, So, anyways,
So, does God relent or repent? Like, change his mind? It's like in First Samuel, what I was doing last night. It's yes, he does, and the next sentence is no, he doesn't, and the next sentence. I couldn't. I was grappling with that word because it's trying to understand something in human terms that he didn't really change his mind because God's impossible for God to change. But yet, what is that even? Like, how do you deal with that?
yeah, there are two passages. Well, one in First Samuel 15, where so it's talking about King Saul, right? And then God, he didn't want a king, he wanted theocracy. And it's like, all right, you want to be like the other nations, like just like you're in high school, right? In high school, you're like, man, he liked that hat. I want that hat too, Mom, right? You come back and you're like, you want to be like the other kids in school. It's like, okay. And he's like, all right, and then he made Saul king, right? But obviously that this wasn't the man after God's own heart. And it says like he kind of regretted that. So there is a theological position called open theism. Okay, and ironically, it started from Hamilton, Ontario, which is like an hour away from where I live, not even in Toronto, but McMaster University. And a bunch of theologians from the seminary came up with open theism, which is essentially a belief that God changes his mind. And you have these passages in 1 Samuel 15, Genesis 6, right? When the flood. But essentially, the way these passages, think of it, if God changes his mind on something, then it affects the omniscience of God. Does God know everything? Well, so of course he does, right? And if he changes his mind, then he didn't necessarily know, because he would have made that decision to make humanity for the passage in Genesis 6. He wouldn't have chose Saul if he knew. He would have just chose David right away, right? Then we wouldn't have the, Kingdom of David or Saul series on Amazon to watch, right? But essentially, it's the way theologians would describe that is God does know. It's just this is God's way of interacting with humans, is that he has to lisp. He has to speak in human terms. He has to forget, kind of, for humans to understand. So essentially, it's a no. He doesn't change his mind, but it appears like he'll change his mind. So it's John Calvin, the theologian, says that God lisps to us, and it's in the context of John Calvin saying that are these passages, Bonnie. So it's almost like God has to speak to us like he would speak to a child, like a baby. So if you speak to a baby, you don't speak quantum physics or some biology or whatnot, but you'd have to speak on its terms. And when God quote unquote forgets, it's almost like he's just working with humans as they go along. Does that make sense?
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense, Bonnie?
Yeah, thanks.
Is it almost like in Genesis where God was asking Adam when he was hiding, "Where are you?"
Yes, precisely. So, or Genesis 22. Genesis 22 is when Abraham sacrificed Isaac. He's like, "Where?" Same thing. It was the angel of the Lord. It's Christ. So it's asking like a rhetorical question almost. Yeah. And then as a narrator, the narrator will say, "Well, God forgot." Really, but it's realistically, it's God just trying to relate to beings that don't know everything. Yeah. Danny, was that you?
Yeah. Doesn't he allow that to happen? Like in the wilderness, eating quail or meat. It's like, you want it that bad? Go ahead. You want to go against what I'm telling you to do, the Ark of the Covenant. You want to carry it that way? Not in the sticks? Oh, okay, go ahead. I mean, isn't that relevant too?
Yes. Yeah. Precisely. So. Yeah, it's interesting when you get all into these passages. Anyways, we gotta start with our passage. We're supposed to go through two chapters today. What we could do if we don't get through it, we could do the whole Melchizedek thing all in one. We can do like 6 and 7 next week. But anyways, can someone read chapter 4, 14 to 16? So we finished on chapter 4, verse 13 last week, and then we're gonna start with verse 14 of chapter 4. Because I'm 14 to 16. Can someone read?
Jesus, the great high priest, since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in a time of need.
All right. So remember, this chapter 5 should start here. I know we're starting here in chapter 4, but to follow the flow of the argument, it really starts here. Okay, so essentially, chapter 4, verse 14 is where the argument begins. Okay, so remember, that's Michael Johnson saying next week. Sorry. So essentially, remember, Jesus is better than angels. Okay, Jesus is more superior. He's better than Moses, and now Jesus is better. He's more superior than what? High priest. So he is our high priest. Okay, verse 14. So then we have what? A great high priest who has passed through the heavens. Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. Okay, so remember, we have a great high priest. Okay, when it says we have a great high who has passed through the heavens. This is most likely the ascension in Genesis or in Acts chapter 15. And it says, so remember, Jesus is eternal, he's sinless, and they'll say in verse 15, he sympathizes. Verse 15, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who is in every respect has been tempted as we have, yet without sin. Okay, so he's without sin and he's able to sympathize with our weaknesses. And then verse 16, talking about the throne room of God. Okay, let us then with confidence draw near to what? The throne room of God, or the throne room of grace, other translations would say, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Okay, so what was a high priest? What was the essence of a high priest?
To communicate with God, to be the liaison to the regular people in the Holy of Holies.
I feel like a priest, like this whole concept of sacrifice, I think it's ingrained in us as humans. I really do. It won't be like 10 for 10 every time, but I think there's a generalization as far as guilt, justice, atonement. Someone needs to be sacrificed, right? Even without Christianity or Judaism, I think it's something that's ingrained within us that we do, even if you never heard of it. Like I think of the Aztecs, the Mayans, like before Columbus, before Hernan Cortez, it's that they were sacrificing humans, right, on behalf of the sun god to keep it up. Like it's something that humans do. But essentially, a high priest. They had a priest too, right? Essentially, a high priest or a priest was someone that represented a human on behalf of God, right? So how can we get a human and put him in that place of humanity and God? That was considered a high priest. Okay, but the thing was that a high priest had a fallen status, right? This high priest here is what? From heaven. He's passed through the heavens, it says, and he's able to sympathize with us in our weaknesses, it says. Okay, and it also says, now we are able to draw near to the throne of grace. So in heaven, I believe that there is an actual throne room, like a literal actual throne room, and it is the essence of the presence of God. Okay, and that if you look at our fallen world, our fallen state, if you look at the Garden of Eden, what was next after? Like the Garden of Eden was an actual tabernacle, it was an actual temple, the way it's set up. So that was a meaning. It was a meeting place between man and God. It was on a hill. The book of Ezekiel says. Okay, and if you look at after the fall in Genesis chapter 3, you had the tabernacle. It was a tent, and that was what it was, a meeting place before man and God. And after that's gone, you have a better tabernacle, which is the temple, right? But it was a meeting place before man and God. Right? And then after that, it comes in Jesus. John 1:14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He tabernacled among us. It was the presence of God, right? But all this to say, there's an actual throne room of God, or throne room of grace that's in heaven, that we do our best in this life, in this fallen state, to mimic, right? But now, because of Jesus, right? John 1:14, he becomes the tabernacle. Now the Holy Spirit dwells inside of us, right? We now have this access. We have this access to the throne room of God, right? And what does it say? It says that we can come to him, what? We can come to him, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in times of need. Okay? Now, the beautiful thing about Christ being a man, and this remember, for us, we talked about this last week, when it comes to Christ being God, it was back then that they argued that he wasn't a man. They believed that he was God. So for the first millennia of church history, there were 7 ecumenical councils, but they're almost all around the identity of Jesus. But the first 3 centuries, 4, it wasn't really debated. They knew that Jesus was God. For us, we debate him being God nowadays, right? No one questions his humanity because we have all this history around him. But back then, in the first century, no one questioned his divinity. They questioned his humanity. So they had these strange beliefs. For instance, Docetism. Docetism was a heresy that says that Jesus appeared to be a man, right? Or the Gnostic belief. This is why in 1 John, 2 John John is saying, hey, we touched him, right? We had fished with him. How about that? I mean, he was a real person, because they denied it, right? So again, the whole point of the book of Hebrews, one of the arguments he's saying is like, no, he is a man. He sympathizes with us, right? So you as a human being, when you pray, you can go to someone that is not distant, that's not like Greek mythology, right? That's almost abstract, but that has lived, that went through the same sufferings as we do on a day-to-day basis. Like if you ever think of like Jesus, you ever think of Christ, it's like, can he really sympathize with you in your life? Right, emotionally, all the things that you've gone through in life, I think if you really get to the very bottom of it, I think he has, right? If you think of, like, say, loneliness, anxiety, all the things that people deal with on today, it's like he's dealt with it on a very on a different degree, right? Now, the good thing about this is that when someone has been through what you've been through, there's a level of sympathy, and you know that it's easier for you to go to that person. Is that true? Right?
Absolutely. Big deal.
If you are going through something, and there's a psychology, all of a sudden you start to develop. You're now like, you're asking these questions, and you look around. You're like, I don't think anyone would deal. I don't think anyone would know me or understand. You're less inclined to go to that person to talk. Right? You recoil and you stay at a distance. But when someone has gone through what you've been through, guess what? You reach out, right? This is why when people go to a therapist, there's a level of trust. This person understands. Versus if they don't understand, if it's like some ivory tower theologian, you're just quiet. And it's the same thing with Christ and God. When you go to God in prayer, there's a personal nature as far as, no, I can go to him, versus he's abstract. Right? He's like the Greek god of Zeus, who just doesn't get me. Right? So again, we have a great high priest. That is what he says. So when you go to God, it's less of a, you go to the principal's office, you're like, oh man, versus you go to someone that you trust, right? That understands you. Okay. Now let's go to chapter 5. And now he's going, remember, it's a continuous flow. So chapters 4, 14 to 16, it's Jesus is our great high priest. That's how we introduce. So He introduces Jesus better than the angels. Jesus is better than Moses. Now Jesus is our high priest. He's better than the Levitical high priest. Okay? And then chapter 5, what he's going to do is now he's going to talk about qualifications of the high priest in the Old Testament. Can someone read chapter 5, verses 1 to 10? Chapter 5, verses...
Every high priest is a man chosen to represent other people in their dealings with God. He presents their gifts to God and offers sacrifices for their sins. And he is able to deal gently with ignorant and awkward people because he himself is subject to the same weakness. That is why he must offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as theirs. And no one can become a high priest simply because he wants such an honor. He must be called by God for his work, just as Aaron was. That is why Christ did not honor himself by assuming he could become high priest. No, he was chosen by God, who said to him, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And in the other passage, God said to him, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." While Jesus was here on earth, he offered prayers and pleading with a loud cry and tears to the one who could rescue him from death. And God heard his prayer because of his deep reverence for God. Even though Jesus was God's son, he learned obedience from the things he suffered. In this way, God qualified him as a perfect high priest, and he became the source of eternal salvation for all those who obey him. And God designated him to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek.
All right. So look at verses 1 to 4. He lists out qualifications of a human high priest in the Old Testament. Okay. This would be very similar to the way it's structured in the book of Exodus, but the first qualification of verse 1. Sorry. In verse 1, he represents people before God. Okay, remember that's like the essence. That's the essence of a high priest, right? It's kind of like a humans. I'm representing humanity on behalf of God, but I'm representing God on behalf of humanity, right? And obviously Jesus did it the best, is because Jesus was fully God. So when he was with humanity, he's like, no, I represent God. And when he went to the Father, he'd be the perfect representation to humanity. Why? It's because he was a man. He didn't appear to be a man. He actually was a man. And that line of argumentation was big in the first century because remember, they just believed the physical was like evil and decaying, and all that. When it's like, no, God made this. We messed it up, really, right? So you have people represent people before God, and then verse 2, he understands our weakness. Okay, and that's a second criteria, and then the third, he's offering sacrifices for his own sin in verse 3. Because of this, he is obligated to offer sacrifices for his own sins, just as he does for those of the people. So back then, if you were a Levite, you had to offer sacrifices before you had to offer a sacrifice before the people. Okay, obviously Jesus does not, because he was perfect. Okay, and then the fourth criteria, he was appointed by God. Verse 4, and no one takes his honor for himself, but only when called by God. Okay, only when he's called by God, just as Aaron was. So essentially, the priest had to be appointed by God. You could not just say, you know what, I'm going to be president. I'm going to, I want to be high priest. Aaron's going to be, I'm going to be the priest. No, Aaron was appointed by God. Okay, he was appointed by God. So the four criteria as far as what a priest was in the Old Testament: represented people before God, verse 1, understood human weakness, verse 2, offered sacrifice for his own sins, verse 3, and be appointed by God, verse 4. Okay? And remember, what was big, what you have to be appointed by God, because sometimes man would appoint man and it would not look good. Okay? And we see, and the reason why I'm saying it would not look good when man would, is that there were many corrupt priests at the time. Right? You read the Old Testament. So at the time in first century, guess who was appointed the high priest before the temple was sacked in 70 AD? It was the Romans. The Romans were appointing the high priest of the temple, and they wouldn't be honest. They'd be very corrupt, right? So and you kind of almost like the CCP, the Communist Party of the Chinese Communist Party, in the sense of there's the underground church, but then there's the CCP church that the government appoints, and obviously if they appoint a pastor, the pastor's going to say whatever the government says. Very similar, if you had a high priest in the first century appointed by a Roman official, guess what? They'd be aligned with those of Rome, right? And then you bring up the Sicarii. Remember we talked about the Sicarii, the assassins. That's why they killed the high priests sometimes, right? Imagine like a Jew wanting to revolt, killing the high priest is because they were known as collaborators. Sometimes the high priest would. You see that? So essentially, there was a danger when a man would appoint a high priest. Like you think of the Old Testament, Hophni and Phinehas. You guys know Hophni and Phinehas? There were some of the priests that were in the Old Testament that they offered strange fire, right, in the book of Leviticus, and God killed them through fire, right? And then you have the sons of Eli, right? And then they remember when Samuel, when he heard the voice, Samuel, that was Eli, right? And then all of a sudden he had two corrupt sons too, right? And they would steal food. Again, there were corrupt priests at the time that would not. And this is the holiest place on the planet, if you think of it, right? But again, this is the downside of being appointed by another person. But now here, he is appointed by God. So Jesus, look at Jesus in verse 5. It says, so the four criteria of a high priest in the Old Testament. Now it talks about Jesus, of his qualifications, how he's superior than the high priest. Okay, first is he's divinely appointed. Look at verse 5. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made a high priest, but was appointed by who? God, by him, who said to him, and he quotes Psalm 2 verse 7, "You are my son, what? Today I have begotten you." Okay? And then he says in verse 6, as he says also in another place, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Okay? Quoting Psalm 110 verse 4. Okay? So again, we have here, Christ is divinely appointed. He did not be like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to die for the sins of the world. Right? We see him in Gethsemane, like weeping and like sweating blood because of like, oh my, this is, but he was appointed by the Father. Okay? Also, is that Jesus is, he's fully human during suffering. Look at verse 7 to 8. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears. What do you think that was? So this is in reference to suffering. He says, offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears. What do you think that was?
He was in pain.
He was in pain? You think it was at Gethsemane?
Yeah.
Yeah? It says it when he was in Gethsemane, that he almost word for word. Right? Okay.
I mean, he went off, so there's a lot of undocumented stuff where he could have, he could have been loud and sincere and all that, like, when he went off and no one was with him except the Father. So, but yeah, it's probably the garden, in my opinion, but I don't know.
But he definitely went through a lot of pain.
Yeah.
The time they whipped him and put thorns on his head and all that.
Yeah.
Stabbed him in the side.
Yeah.
Nothing to drink. He was dying for something to drink, and they gave him what? Vinegar?
Yeah.
Well, they offered it to him, and then he refused it, right?
This was a human moment, right? So we're talking about God, man, like this is his humanity in agony, obviously, right? If it was his God nature, he'd just wipe everyone out, right? But again, you could, but he's being obedient here. So Philippians 2, he gave up his power, or he didn't give up his divinity. You can't give up what you are, but one thing that's attached to it is his power, right? So
Ruben, you had said the high priest is appointed by God, right?
Uh-huh.
Rather than man. So how do you have confidence that, or how do you confirm that a high priest was appointed by God?
it would be the way that God spoke. The guy that, so for instance, in the Old Testament, God would be more audible, right? As far as when he spoke, or they would use Urim and Thummim. So I thought of having a photo of the the breastplate. Is that the high priest would have like a chest piece. So if have you guys heard of like the black Hebrews, the black Israelites, like on the streets of Hollywood? They're very aggressive and big guy. They get that attire from the Levites, but the Levites would have that the chest piece, and then underneath there'd be two stones, a black stone and a white stone in a bag, and it'd be called the Urim and Thummim. And it would be yes or no answer before God. So let's just say she opened the window, right? And if we open the window, there's going to be ethical issues. Flies might come in, right? So let's pray about it, or let's get an answer on like a true something we really need to come to before God. I know we have to come before God for this one answer. And then what you do is you pray about it, and then you would put your hand in the bag and say it'd be a white rock, meaning yes. A white rock, a white rock, a white rock, and that was he wants this guy to do it. Yeah, so they would Urim and Thummim, they would cast lots. So casting lots would be Acts 1 of Matthias, right? So when Judas was gone, they needed to fill that rigid 12. So they found Matthias, but they found Matthias by casting lots. So it's the same concept as the Urim and Thummim. But that was their way of getting an answer from God. So God would either verbally say it, or they would use one of these. They'd use a means of like the Urim and Thummim or casting lots. Yeah, but there's no like. Let's go to John chapter 2. Oh, it's Frank. there's none of that. Yeah. So the way that God spoke, like that's the way that God would reveal Himself. Yeah. So He would come and go in the Old Testament, come and go. But when He'd come, it's like, how do you know Samuel was a prophet of God? God verbally said it, right? He verbally told him, right? So again, God would come down and He'd make Himself known. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So it says, verse 7 and 8, in the days of His flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to Him who was able to save him from death, and He was heard because of His reverence. Wow. Imagine that. You're heard because of your reverence. We need that, by the way. The church needs reverence. Like serious reverence, as far as like when it comes to God. It's like, I don't know. I think the church is slowly coming back to an understanding of reverence, because culture and society has become so sluggish. I think there's a desire for a lot of us, a lot of young people too, that we desire to go back. We desire to go back to like more reverent days, more polished, if you want to say, orderly, respect. Saying ma'am, sir, versus yo, what's up? To our elders.
Shut up.
Yeah, but I think there's a desire, but reverence in churches. I think my generation was the one that brought in the reverence, in my opinion, because I lived through it. I get it. Meaning that like your generation, the boomers, there was more of that like suit and tie, Bible belief, and then all of a sudden our generation was like, we're gonna rebel against the church. Like we were, yeah.
It's boring.
Yeah, and I could like name the names that brought us to that point, and now we're at a point of like, hey, this is out of control. We look like MTV right now. Right?
Well, a lot depends on the reverend or the pastor, because he needs to put it, just tell it like it is.
But I think they
Yeah.
accepted them too because they didn't want to lose them. They wanted to have
Mhm.
people there.
It was a means exactly, and so it was a means of being relevant for people that were disinterested with like orthodoxy and so the Catholic Church tried to mimic the Protestant Church in Second Vatican, where they took away they have Latin Mass, and then they took away Latin Mass and went back to English, and then they just went downhill, right? And the Protestant Church kind of went uphill. But what the psyche, right? Kevin says when Don Lemon came into that church, right? But it's a holy moment, right? It's supposed to be the Sunday gatherings, right?
Well, even when I came here, it was summertime, I think, and we didn't wear shorts, flip-flops, t-shirts, and I was like, whoa, this is a little too relaxed
Yeah.
for me. And I wasn't used to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it is generational. Like, I think they announced at the airport like no more pajamas. I don't know if it's a federal. Yeah, because you go to the airport, everyone's wearing their baggy. You see girls wearing like XXX sweaters, hoodies, and like, right? But I get the psychology behind it. But like, as a society, it's like how comfortable. Back in the day, like Disneyland, you had to wear a suit and tie. Right? So
You
again,
definitely got dressed up to fly.
yeah,
You didn't just wear hangout clothes and,
yeah,
I mean, you got dressed up. But when I went to church in Texas, I don't know if it was just the church, but they were dressed, people dressed.
yeah,
Men wore suits, women wore dresses, and
Yeah. We didn't dare wear pants to church, no.
yeah.
it
They're
wasn't
still
that.
doing
It was
that.
like 5 years ago. They still are doing that.
Yeah.
Sunday best.
Something.
Well, it's funny. It's funny that, or it's ironic, however, like how we talk about, the reverence of Christ and how God hurt him because of it. And then like the human side of it is like, well, we reference, our dress, like what are we wearing? But it's like, what are we wearing in our heart? Because that's what God sees is like the reverence in our heart. You can fool people easily by wearing a certain thing, like you could wear a military fatigues and people will think, oh, he serves this country, or, people are easily fooled by, it's like robbers put on like, Amazon delivery vest to rob a house, but it's like, you think that they work for Amazon, but they're robbing you. So it's like, looking at someone's heart is like difficult. Like the reverence comes from the heart. Like it's amazing that God would be able to, see us in that pure sense of like, everyone else doesn't get us, but like Jesus gets the people that, we don't get.
Yeah.
And he gets us because it's like other people don't get us sometimes. And then we feel sad because it's like, oh, we're misunderstood or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I do think the more respectful though that we dress or that we act, that we're more respectful, we're more into it, I guess.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah,
Maybe that's because that's the way I grew up, but
And I get both, meaning that like reverence is inside out. And like what Kevin, like reverence is a matter of the heart. Like I'd rather, dress like a homeless person, but really reverence God in my heart versus like polished suit and tie, clean cut haircut, and like have zero, zero reverence in my heart, obviously. But I think both are better in an idealistic world, meaning the reverence comes from within, and as a society, as a collective group, we all, like there's an order to this world that we live by, right? So, yeah.
so it's okay if we're casual at Bible study.
Yeah. I'm not. If it's hot outside, I get the practicality, It's
I do,
just
but it bothers me. If I went to a church that people had shorts and flip flops on, I would just have to say okay.
yeah.
But I don't like it.
Me too. Me too.
Well, I think the pastors are very important, but I think the parents are more important too, because they're with them all the time, and they teach them respect.
But these weren't kids. These were
Well,
adults.
I mean, teenagers, whatever.
No, these were 40,
Oh, well, that's different.
30, 40 here.
Yeah.
You know, wearing shorts, t-shirts, and flip flops. That
But
wasn't
still, they
kids.
grew up knowing that it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
So, no?
Well, I mean, I don't tell them what to do, but I think, oh no, you should, you know, I just don't like it, but I'm not gonna tell somebody that.
Well, I don't think you should be mean and do this, do that, but just love them. And as they love you, then they will respect you, and they'll learn how to keep that going with other people that they truly like to be around and feel like that they are godly people.
Yeah.
Let's continue. So it says, Christ, he is the superior high priest. He was divinely appointed, verse 5 and 6. He experiences suffering like us in verse 7 and 8. Verse 8, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Okay, when he says he learned obedience, it's not like he was naturally disobedient then became obedient. It's just there's a state that he was in and that he understood through those desires. This is what it means to be obedient, to subjugate the desires to the rules of God, the rules of the Father. That's what it means to be obedient as far as a human being. And then last, he was the source of our eternal salvation, verse 9 and 10, where it says, in being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. And we're close to our hour, so we can't elaborate on Melchizedek much, but we will. And look at chapter 7. Look at the very beginning. It says the priestly order of Melchizedek. We'll get into more of him later, but essentially the essence of what the author is saying when he brings up Melchizedek is if you are a priest, which tribe did you have to be a part of? If you're a high priest, you have to be
Levites.
You have to be part of the Levites, right? Jesus was part of Judah, right? How does that make sense? And that, remember, if you are from the tribe of you're human, you have to pass it down, right? But Jesus is part of a very interesting lineage, and that's the order of Melchizedek. And Melchizedek is a well, again, we'll have to go into him next week, but essentially Melchizedek is a mysterious figure in the Old Testament, only mentioned twice. I think it's Genesis 14 and Psalm 110. That's the only time he's ever mentioned. But he was this person that was a king, was a high priest, and that it wasn't passed down from generation to generation. It was like a divine status almost. And some people believe that Jesus was that Melchizedek in the Old
And I
Testament.
was just going to say that, but it said Jesus was.
Some people argue that, right? And we'll go into him next time. And this is the reason why the author of Hebrews brings up Melchizedek, right? Have you guys heard of Melchizedek before?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a mystery behind him because, like, who is this Melchizedek?
He had a father and mother.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No father, no mother. So, but to be a priest, there had to be passed down from one generation to another, but not with Melchizedek. And that's why he brings up Melchizedek here. Okay.
But it's like Melchizedek was like a shadow of the ultimate truth, right? Like, I mean, Jesus is superior to what Melchizedek, like his purpose or whatever, right? Like it's is that another thing, or is that not right?
One more time, Kevin.
So it's like, in the order of Melchizedek, it's like a shadow of like the things to come that came through Christ. So it's like, Jesus is superior to him too. Like, even though he had a purpose back then, like he's in that order, but it's like, it was just kind of like how Jesus's root came through Jesse and all these people, but it's like he was still superior to them all.
Mm-hmm.
And all the other things were just like a shadow of or a preview or whatever. I don't know.
That's correct. Yeah. It's a
But
foreshadow. You're right.
the other thing I was wondering is verse 9. Is verse 9 kind of a similar weight to like Romans 10:9?
In what way?
Well, because it says like
I know
to
Romans
all who obey him. So it's like a command. Like it's like it's not just simply believing and confessing and believing in your heart, but it's like obeying. So I feel like it's just another component. I don't know.
Well,
I'm just wondering.
This is the Catholic Protestant nuance. Remember, like I kept saying before, is like a lot. We're almost saying the same thing, but just in a different way. So, for instance, he became a source of eternal. He became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Right. So it's like you have to obey to be part of it, to be part of the kingdom almost. Right. Does that work salvation? But it's at the end of the day, a Protestant will say, well, a truly regenerated heart will just naturally obey. Right. And that's true. A Catholic will make a separation or put them together and say salvation is believing and you working together for it, right? Where we separate it, we say this is salvation, this is sanctification. We separate the two, but essentially, no, you have to believe, you have to obey in order to be part of the kingdom. Now, that obedience is not necessarily, I'm doing the incentive, I'm doing this so I can be part of the kingdom, versus I'm doing this organically because of my faith. That's the real essence of it right there. So that real faith that you have in the Jesus that's better than angels, Moses, and the high priest is obeying. Not perfect, but obeying. Fights for that place of obedience. Okay, Danny?
Yeah, you say it's a Catholic idea. A lot of Protestants believe that too, as far as I'm concerned, in some denominations.
Yeah, Anglican. Yeah. So like, it'd be the more American is heavily Calvinistic. Okay, if you don't know the history of like Protestant Christianity, like it's true. Like what made this nation in 1776 are Anglo-Saxon Protestants from the British Empire that want to break away. And remember, the British Empire at the time was Protestant too, because of King Henry VIII. But they were still associated and blessed by the Catholic Church. That the Puritans, when they came, to New England, were like, no, that's why they were called the Puritans, because they wanted to get rid of the Anglican. So you guys call it the Episcopalian Church here. We call it the Anglican Church in Canada and in England. But essentially, you want to cutting away from the Anglicans too. So it's a heavily Protestant nation and mindset a lot of people have, right? So yeah. Any questions, guys? So obviously, I was going to do the rest of chapter 5, talks about the warning of apostasy, and then chapter 6. I was going to finish, but we're going to have to stop here because it's we're over our hour mark. Okay, sorry guys. But next week, what we're going to do is we're going to continue with 5:11, and we're going to finish 7 next week. So I want to talk about Melchizedek and finish this argument of Jesus being our great high priest. And then the week after that, we'll go into him being the better sacrifice. Okay? Any quick questions before we close online?
What's interesting is my friend just sent me a thing about the Garden of Gethsemane and how like we're supposed to stay awake and pray and not fall asleep in those moments.
Say that again, Kevin.
So it's like my friend just sent me a text about like the Garden of Gethsemane and like how we're supposed to stay awake, and like and be praying and be alert and not fall asleep.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was interesting, just adding it to what we learned in that one little section, 8 and 9,
Yeah,
7 and 8.
When it comes to narrative in the Bible, it's you always want to ask the question: is it prescriptive or descriptive? Meaning, is this meant for me today in the 21st century, or is he describing Samson had long hair? Is that prescriptive, meaning we all men have to grow long hair, right? Or is it just descriptive? It's just describing this is what Samson did. You see what I'm saying? So in that case, the Gethsemane, a lot of Christians I know have
that's
experienced,
interesting.
they inadvertently, without this distinction, prescriptive, descriptive, experience a lot of guilt is because they naturally prescribe it to them, right? You'll read, right, Peter, James, and John, the three, and it's like, well, Jesus, kind of gave them a hard time because they weren't praying, they're falling asleep. And it's like, oh, I have to do the same thing. It's like 2 a.m. I'm like, right? And it's like, was that meant for me? You know what I mean? Like I'm supposed to like pray in or is it like, hey, that's just in reference to Peter, James, and John at a specific time before the Son of God is going to be crucified and be the sacrifice for the whole world, right? We don't live. That's not me, but it doesn't mean I have to be lazy, right? You see what I'm saying? So anyway, Bonnie, you had
That's
I was
interesting.
just wondering what happened to him, Melchizedek.
okay.
Did he just disappear? Did he pass away? Because we never heard any more about him.
We'll bring him
You'll bring that
next
up,
week. We'll
okay.
talk. Yeah, we'll talk about next week. All right, guys. Then we're gonna have to finish here because it's what time is it? So my computer it says 10:30 because it's Toronto, Ontario time, 3 hours. So even how long I've been here, I haven't switched it back. But it's 7:30, and we have another church here. Wayne, we're going to do communion really quick. So if you're more than welcome to do communion with us online. If not, we will see you guys next week. But just if you want to do communion, just get a piece of cracker and juice, and then we're going to celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is our time of communion where we celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. As before he came to the cross, he sat with his disciples and says, "This is my body, and this is my blood." And before we take the communion, we're going to pray and examine ourselves. Lord, we just thank you for this time. And God, we just pray for our hearts, our lives as we align ourselves with you, Lord. Help us to do this faithfully and commit ourselves to you. In the name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Jesus says, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Let's eat the bread. Jesus says, "This cup is a new cup in my blood. Do this as often you drink of it in remembrance of me." Let's drink the cup. We thank you, Lord, for this time. We love you, and we just thank you for the insight from Hebrews that Christ is the greater high priest that we have access to 24/7 because of Christ interceding on our behalf, Lord. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.